If you're listening to this episode on the day of its release, June 21st, 2023, today marks the 35th anniversary since the premiere of the classic Robert Zemeckis film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? But did you know that the life of Roger Rabbit goes back long before that? The movie, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, is based on the book Who Censored Roger Rabbit by Gary K. Wolfe, which was originally published in 1981. Listen as Emily from the Book of the Mouse Club podcast joins me to discuss some of the differences and similarities between one of her favorite movies and the book it's based on. You won't believe some of the iconic characters from the movie that don't exist at all in the original source material. Plus, we discuss Roger Rabbit's history in the theme parks, how this character has lived beyond the initial book and movie, and so much more. So hop aboard Benny the Cab with us, as our next stop is Toontown.
It's time to dive into today's Disney dialogue.
Welcome to the show, Emily, from the Book of the Mouse Club podcast. How's it going? Happy to have you here.
Hey, Jeff, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is your first time on here, although I've had your co-host on and I've been on your podcast, but this is your first time here, right?
Yeah, this is my first time on Disney with a Z.
Very good. Excellent. And we're here to talk about something that you're very passionate about. We have a big anniversary coming up for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It is the 35th anniversary. On June 21st, 1988, the film was released. And we're going to talk about, considering you do a book podcast, we're going to talk about the original source, the book Who Censored Roger Rabbit by Gary Wolfe, which was published in 1981.
Yeah, so this was really interesting. Courtney and I have had this on our radar. We just have like this list of books that we just keep. And we were really excited when you reached out to us. Unfortunately, Courtney couldn't make it, but this has always been one of my favorite Disney films. It's definitely in my top 5 and was a standard in my house. And when I found out there was a book, I was floored. I had, you wouldn't know. And we're going to talk about it. The book is very different than what we get into the film.
Yes, absolutely. But I do want to start with, considering you are such a big fan of the film, how were you first introduced to Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
I had a hard time trying to think of this, but I think it was either middle school or high school, because I remember watching the film a lot by myself. Like after school, my mom was a teacher and she was in elementary school. So middle school, high school, I would have beat her home. And I would be able to be home by myself. And I remember watching with my sister who's older. So it was just the two of us. So I'm putting myself probably somewhere between 6th grade to freshman year, I think, is the first time I saw this for me. And it had to have been on HBO because it wasn't until later that we got it on DVD. So I think it was just one of those, you're after school, your parents aren't home. So you're like, I can watch TV and not be told whatever. So we'd go to HBO, we'd break out the snacks. And then I just remember running into this one and being a Disney film, although you don't register right away it's a Disney film.
Well, it originally wasn't. It was originally a Touchstone picture. Now they'll put on the packaging and stuff, Walt Disney production. But back then, it was a Touchstone picture.
Until you saw Mickey Mouse in a parachute, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, well,
and Dumbo flying out the window.
But you also saw Bugs Bunny, which is Warner Brothers. So, yeah, it was everything. It was crazy. And that was kind of, listen, this film was revolutionary. It won awards for the effects and the work of the animation with the live action. And of course, Walt did stuff like this, putting Mary Poppins into an animated world. This was kind of the opposite.
I feel like this perfected what he was trying to do. So with the Alice comedies, what he accomplished then and built from the Alice comedies for Mary Poppins, in both of those, Alice is always in the animated world. Mm-hmm. But then Mary Poppins, we only get the one sequence. This is the first time where you have animated characters and live action mixed together, and you go between both worlds multiple times. And so I think that movie magic is the culmination of the work that he started. And I know we've had with Mary Poppins 2 and other films, but this is before we get modern CGI. The number of practical effects that needed to be created to make this work I think is what makes this movie stand up so much, even 35 years later, when other CGI from like the early 2000s doesn't translate as well. I think the practical effects and the movie magic that they built off of from Walt is what makes this such a great film even today.
Yeah, I love watching the scenes and just thinking to myself, okay, so obviously the animated character isn't really there, but that chair knocking over is practical or whatever's is happening in the scene, and just like picturing what's happening on set without the animated character. I'm such a nerd for like special effects stuff like that, so I love it.
Did you watch any of the behind the scenes features?
I've seen a lot of stuff on this, not recently, but I will say, so my first memory of this, I'm pretty sure had to be VHS. I don't remember seeing this in theaters. It was 1988, so I would have been 6 years old. So too young to see Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
I wasn't born yet.
Well, I'm older. So yeah, I do remember getting the VHS. I feel like a lot of times at Christmas we would get like kind of family VHS tapes. It was like not for a specific person. It was like, hey, this is for you and your siblings to enjoy. And I remember getting Roger Rabbit and seeing it many times. And it is one of those films that I don't see anything new necessarily when I watch it, but I will tell you, story-wise, so I obviously recently rewatched it for this podcast episode, and I guess the last time I saw it, I must have been a kid, because there was stuff happening that, like, I visually remember it, but I didn't get what was going on.
It is a borderline adult film.
Very much
so. I think it reflects a lot of, and because it's such a pull of all these different studios, it does have a lot of that Tex Avery humor that you get with like Bugs Bunny cartoons, that even as an adult, when you watch it, you get something totally different out of it that the kids did. And for me, yeah, same. This is one though that has, ever since I started watching it in 6th, 7th grade, I've perpetually kept watching it. When we got the DVD, I checked. It's not the anniversary copy. I had my mom send me pictures because it's at my parents' house in New Jersey and I'm in Maryland. And it's not the anniversary edition because I thought we had the 25th maybe, but the DVD, it came in like a portfolio. It looks like a detective folder. It has headshots of Roger and Jessica Rabbit. Like it came with all these extras that was so fun. So this was a regular for me and my sister. And I talk about this a lot with Courtney. I grew up being like most probably millennial kids. I was babysat a lot by my grandparents who grew up in the 30s and 40s. So I watched a lot of classic movies with my grandparents. So this to me is like that marriage of animation plus classic films. So this has always been a favorite and I watch it multiple times a year.
Oh, that's awesome. Like I said, it had been a long time and I was kind of shocked by the storyline and just not even, I really didn't get the movie when I was a kid. I realized like, yeah, I have no idea what was going on. I was just enjoying silly antics on screen. So it was fun to rewatch and it really does hold up very well. But I'm curious. So that was the first, introduction for us to the film. When did you first realize there was a book that it was based on?
Actually, it wasn't until Courtney and I started the Book of the Mouse Club, because that's when we're starting to take a dive on going into our first season, just how many books can we think of and pull from. And one of my favorites, the favorite genre that we do, we'll cover anything from memoirs to history, but I love reading original source material that then Disney buys the rights to and comparing those films. And it might have been, I think when Disney Plus came out, Courtney did this deep dive into looking at what films were being released on Disney Plus. And she made a spreadsheet because data is her thing. And we did like a 20-minute episode of just what was coming out on Disney Plus that was related to films. And she found that one. And then that was on our radar ever since. But we're 5 years down and we still haven't touched it. So we do like to save films for their anniversary years if we can. So this lined up really well that you asked me to come on and talk about it. But yeah, that was a totally new thing for me, mostly when Disney Plus came out. And I think they have like a category like based on books. A lot of streaming networks now do. And that's been popping up. And I think that surprises a lot of people that this is based on a book.
Yeah, I don't know when I first realized it was. Obviously, it's there in the opening credits. It's, it says based on Who Censored Roger Rabbit by Gary Wolfe. But I don't know. I never really thought much about it. You know, a movie always shocks me that it's based on a book. And this isn't necessarily Disney, although I think they might own it now because I think it was a Fox movie. Mrs. Doubtfire. Did you know that that's based on a book?
No.
I think it's called Madame Doubtfire, the book. But yeah, that's one that's based on a book. And like Mrs. Doubtfire, this one, I'm always surprised when I realize, oh, this is based on a book. Very interesting.
Yeah, so unless you're reading those opening credits, like I didn't know one of my other favorites that we did an episode on, Great Mouse Detective. For the longest time, even though I've been watching that movie forever, I guess just during those opening credits, I was like, go grab my drink, grab whatever I want, and like skipped that. And then one day I read it. I was like, Courtney, it's a book. We have to read it.
Yeah, as a kid, you don't read that stuff. You don't read those screen credits, but I always do now. And so yeah, 1981, as I said, the book was published. Same year, the Walt Disney Company purchased the rights to this book. So Ron Miller was the CEO in 1981. I mean, we'll get into the details of the book, but as you were reading it, I don't know how anybody at Disney, other than the fact that like Mickey Mouse is mentioned, like I don't know why they thought to themselves, yeah, let's get this for Disney. Although he did start Touchstone Pictures, Ron Miller, so he may have been looking for more adult content, but
I think maybe that
weird
marriage between the fact that the Toons live in a human world, and it's that reverse Walt Disney of human actors going into the Toon world. So maybe that connection made sense to them. But yeah, maybe looking for that humor, something that kind of bridges and pulls that like emerging audience off of animation into live action, because it brings both. I'm not sure. It's a good question. It is the age of Looney Tunes, though. So if you're watching Saturday morning cartoons, like this is very much that kind of humor.
Yeah, let me give you a really tough task right now. Can you give a brief synopsis of the book before we start talking about characters and comparisons and stuff like that? What's the basic gist of the book? Because I'm going to assume most people listening to this are familiar with the story of the movie.
Spoiler alert now. If you were planning to read the book, pause, read, come back. But pretty much we end up with, it's a combination of stolen art, a double murder, a tea kettle that turns out to be a genie in a bottle. And we get our characters that we do know, Eddie, Roger, and Jessica. Baby Herman is there.
Very small part, yeah.
Very small part. But basically, Roger hires Eddie Valiant to look into his contract because he thinks he's getting screwed over by the DeGreasy Brothers studio. And these are comic book or comic strip characters. So not film, but comics. But in that process of him investigating his contract, all these things keep unraveling of he said, she said between Jessica, who's now his ex-wife, the DeGreasy brothers. And then one day when Eddie goes to show up to tell Roger whatever he's found, Roger's dead and a DeGreasy brother is dead. So we have a double murder trying to figure out who done it. And as things unravel, cartoons have a power of doppelganger, so Roger's still in it while not being in it. He's got like 48 hours until he disintegrates. Yeah,
so Roger is dead. Roger is dead. That's what's shocking. And it's so funny because as I was reading it, like, I think he died on page 50. He was killed on page 50, and it's, a bit over 200 pages, 225, something like that. And I was kind of like, well, he can't really be dead, right? And then the doppelganger thing, which we'll get into. But yeah, so the characters that return, as you said, Roger Rabbit, Jessica Rabbit, Baby Herman, very little, and Eddie Valiant. Rocco and Dom DeGreasy are the two brothers who are comic executives. These are new characters. Carol Masters is a photographer. So there is no Judge Doom. So these characters that are super iconic with the film. There is no Judge Doom. There are no Weasels. There is no Benny the Cab, who I think was like my favorite as a kid. I loved Benny.
Yeah.
There's no Marvin Acme. There is no R.K. Maroon.
And it's not movie studios, it's comic strips.
It's comics. So that's one thing that I found super fascinating. So the way that in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, we see them shooting these animated films as if they are shot like a movie with a camera and a set and this, it's a real thing. This is how they do comic strips.
Yeah,
in the
it's
book.
Like it's frames. So they set it up, they take the picture, that's your first cell. You set it, the next one up, take the picture. But you mentioned with the title, I think the titles are important. We go from Who Censored Roger Rabbit to Who Framed. And that word censored and framed gives a lot away, actually. So censoring means that Roger is killed to shut him up about what he knows of this like stolen artwork, contract craziness. But in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, he's completely innocent. And it's just getting set up for the crime. So there's a really big difference for Roger just based on the title alone, because Roger, like we said, is dead in the book and he's guilty. He did kill Rocco DeGrisi, which we find out at the very end. You're kind of sympathetic towards him, but he is guilty.
Yeah, and as we said, spoilers.
Right, sorry.
No, it's fine. Listen, this is my guess is most people listening to this probably will never read the book, and this is their.
Who knows, maybe now you'll be intrigued.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it is. You know what I will say? It was a really enjoyable read for me, and I am very much, very, very, very much. I'd say 90% of what I read is nonfiction. So for me to sit down and read fiction, it takes a lot for me to do that. I really enjoyed this. Like, it was a fast read, and it did kind of have me like wondering, oh, what's going on here? So I enjoyed it. I'm not going to say I loved it, but I very much enjoyed it. And it was very weird just having like the movie in your mind and wondering, oh, is Judge Doom going to show up at some point and stuff like that. Very interesting.
So I actually went back and forth reading this book, both in print, I have the book, and also on audio, I found on Hoopla. So there's actually 3 books in this series. I have not read the other 2.
We will get to those because, oh my gosh, I haven't read them all, but very fascinating what happened. So we'll get to that.
But there are audiobooks, and so I commute a lot during the day. So I figured to help speed up my reading process, I do both read and listen. So I was going back and forth between the 2, and the narrator they got, it did help bring the feel of the book, because even though the film is very film noir. That's the genre it's trying to emulate. But actually the way the author read this, they had like the 1940s kind of stereotypical accent. Maybe you associate with the 40s, that mid-Atlantic or New Yorker type accent for Eddie. And it really brought that ambiance through, because it has those like really offbeat like similes and metaphors that you get in these really random like film noir like books and detective novels of the 40s and 50s. And it made it really cool. His voice for Roger threw me off because I'm so used to Roger's voice from the film that for Eddie and other characters, I was fine. But for Roger, it was kind of this like gruff voice. I was like, no, I can't do it. But it was really cool. So if you maybe don't want to read it, they are available on audio. I listen through Hoopla, so that means libraries do have them.
Very cool. Let's talk about some similarities that we got here, because this book is from Eddie Valiant's point of view. It's him essentially telling the story. And that's how the movie's set up as well. It's more, Roger Rabbit's name is in the title, but it's really Eddie Valiant's
It's an Eddie story. I would agree with that.
So that's something that's similar. I love the fact, and I was very curious about this, because we all know the headaches of making a film like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where they have cartoons from all the different studios and stuff, is getting the rights to do that. Like, that's really expensive. I'm pretty sure to write it down in a book is not a problem. I don't think you need to get permission from Disney to use the name Mickey Mouse in the book.
Yeah, versus like the image. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So this book is filled with characters like Mickey Mouse is mentioned, Bugs Bunny is mentioned, Dick Tracy is a character in this book.
I was going to bring that up. I know how much you love Dick Tracy.
I love Dick Tracy. And of course, they're not talking about like Warren Beatty Dick Tracy, but they're talking about comic strip Dick Tracy. But even still, I was like, that's so cool. There are definitely...
Now, he did have a scene, briefly.
Yes. Yeah. He had a bit of a scene in there, and it was just so cool to see that. And it's kind of like you have free reign if you're writing this book. You don't have to deal with those legalities that movie making requires. So it was pretty cool to do all that. And you're checking the back to see if they're giving permissions.
I was looking for who the publisher is.
St. Martin's Press published it on June 6th, 1981. So I'm not too familiar with St. Martin's Press.
But that would be something that would fall under the publisher's responsibility.
But I honestly don't think you need it to mention a name. I could be totally wrong. To mention a name,
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's not like...
for Dick Tracy, like, he had a scene, but it was Eddie was showing up to his set to talk to Carol. So all he mentioned was, like, he saw Dick Tracy, spouting his lines, taking a picture, signing an autograph, and he said hi to me on the way out. Like, it was he didn't really talk or do much. He was just there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so maybe just for mentioning a name, I don't think you have to. That stuff's all similar, that you have this cross between worlds. You have all of these characters just living. in this world and that you take it seriously. And I think that's what makes this work. It kind of reminds me of the Muppets.
Yeah.
I'm kind of dipping back into the film, but the reason why it can work is that everyone doesn't look at it like it's weird.
Yeah.
Like you treat the tunes as part of your world, and therefore everyone else will believe that it is, even though it's wacky.
That's a great comparison. I like that a lot. Now, there is a line from Miss Jessica Rabbit. As we said, the story is very different, but there is a line that on page 90 that a lot of folks might recognize. I'm not bad, Mr. Valiant. I'm just drawn that way. And I was
surprised that that's
ooh.
original to the book. I really thought that was from the writers.
Yeah, I think that's
film.
great. I mean, it's a great line, right?
It is a great line.
And by the way, she is bad in this book.
Yes. Some of Baby Herman's lines, the things he says, not super family friendly, about like when Eddie sees him in the film, it's when Eddie sees him in his baby carriage outside of his office and he like freaks out that someone's giving a baby a cigar. He goes to his house to talk to him about his relationship with Roger, but some of that dialogue is verbatim from the book as well. Those were the only two instances I picked up on dialogue, though.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of that, which is why, especially when I came across the Jessica Rabbit one, I was like, ooh, very cool. And that's just such an iconic line from the film. Another thing that I found very similar between the book and the movie was Eddie Valiant's relationship with Roger Rabbit. Like, there was definitely a tremendous amount of annoyance there, but by the end of both of them, he really cares for this rabbit, and he's looking out for this rabbit. And I thought that was kind of a cool through line between the two.
Yes, even though their two individual characters are pretty different from how they go from book to screen, yeah, their relationship arc is the same.
Yeah. And then there was that moment in the first chapter in the book, we have a scene where Roger Rabbit drinks alcohol and has a very extreme reaction, exactly as he does in the film. And this is obviously setting something up for the future, but I thought it was interesting that kind of tied over as well. So it was kind of like traits would follow to the film. Minimal lines would, but as far as story, it's basically a brand new story.
Yeah, I would say the only thing crime-wise that follows is that it's a toony ending. You're like, oh, didn't see that coming. But what the actual crimes are themselves is very different.
Gotta be honest, I kind of hated the ending. The whole genie thing, I was like, this is just coming out of left field. Because the whole time I'm reading it and I'm like, this is what you're supposed to do when you're reading a mystery, right? It's you're trying to figure it out and be like, okay, put the pieces together yourself.
It's a character that wasn't there half the time, just like...
More than half. It was a character that didn't exist until the last few chapters. And you're like, ugh.
What works is that the crime is consistent in the film and all of the players are there the whole time. It's just figuring out who is actually behind it. So in the book, we have this red herring of stolen artwork and Roger's contract, which those two questions we're trying to answer, the only thing they serve is getting Valiant to talk to other people. But they all keep bringing up this tea kettle. And then the tea kettle ends up being the whole entire reason why people are dying, is to get their hands on this tea kettle. But you spend so much of the book about Roger's contract. Why is it Jessica doesn't love him anymore? That it takes a while to get to that ending. And it turns out it's because Roger made a wish on the tea kettle that Jessica would love him, but wishes wear off. And boom, there's a genie who's been wanting to be free. But unlike Roger Williams, who gets Aladdin to free him, he kills somebody. Like, it was very random to me.
Yeah, it felt... Those last few chapters, I just felt like it was kind of cheap, to be honest. I was like,
he had something going, and then, I don't know. The Magic Lantern part, I think it would have worked better if the tea kettle just made of solid gold, like everyone was assuming it was, under a layer of paint, but it turned out to be a magic lamp.
Yeah. So, if Disney ever decides to make an adaptation closer to the book, they could bring back Genie from Aladdin and have him living inside of a tea kettle. And that could be although then Genie would be killing people. I don't know how Disney would feel about that.
They'd have to find something else, because according to Genie's rules, he can't do that.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So whose rules are we playing by here? But so in the end, it turns out that Roger is guilty for killing Rocco DeGreasy because he's jealous that Jessica left him for Rocco. Jessica used to always be with Rocco, but when he made that wish, Jessica married Roger. But as the wish wears off, she goes back to Rocco because she is kind of a gold digger. She wants to be with whoever's got the most money. The genie ends up killing Roger. That was the weird part. I kind of would have liked it better if a DeGreasy brother actually killed Roger. But the whole reason that the DeGreasys are after Roger is because he's got the tea kettle.
Yeah. Very, very weird. Some other weird changes or kind of interesting changes. I would have kind of liked to have seen this on screen, but also at the same time, I'm like, no, it was smart not to do this. Was when the characters speak, all of the animated characters, they have speech bubbles, or at least most of them do. And so it's not always like an audible thing. Obviously, for a movie, you want to hear the characters talk. But in this world that this book exists in,
making a comic strip.
Yeah, they're making a comic strip, so they all have like speech bubbles that like literally come out of their, out of their heads and then like dissipate. And I was like, what a kind of fun visual to picture while you're reading the book.
Yeah, so there are some different rules of being a Toon. So if you're a Toon universe, between the film and the movie, there are some different rules. So like you said, the speech, you get the bubbles. They have this thing called doppelgangers where they can make copies of themselves. And essentially it's your stunt double because they say like some stuff that we have Toons do is so dangerous. They're like, anytime you see like Wile E. Coyote getting hit with an anvil, that's his doppelganger. He's not actually getting hurt. So they can make that. That plays a big thing throughout this story.
It does. And when they introduced that, I was like, okay, that's definitely going to come back. There's going to be a doppelganger somewhere that's like important here because it's introduced. I think it was Jessica's on set or,
And she starts like falling apart and Eddie's like freaked out.
Yeah. So like that is an interesting change. I kind of like that change. But the interesting thing is that means that Toons can get hurt in the world of the book.
Yes, that's the biggest thing is they can die.
There is no dip. As I said, there is no Judge Doom,
right.
So there is no dip.
They can die in any way that a human can. Whereas in the film, they had to think of a way, how do you kill a Toon?
Which is a huge difference, like a massive change.
I think it makes it simpler, though, for the film. I think all these rules of being a Toon or not rules, but these things of being a Toon in the book would have been a lot to figure out for a film, like having speech bubbles everywhere. I think a lot of it simplified it just to make it work better on screen.
Yeah, it's always interesting when there are so many differences between the original source and the movie. You always wonder, was the original creator of this happy with it? And from what I can tell, from the little bit I researched, it seems like Gary Wolfe is happy with the film. And he's definitely got like Roger Rabbit splashed all over his website and stuff. So
and in the cartoons, so like even on the back of the book that I have, I got it from Amazon. So even on the back, it's him in a car with Jessica Rabbit. Yeah, we have the same one. And then in the inside cover, there's some drawings of Roger, but they're the drawings that Disney created, that Richard Williams, the art director for Disney, had drawn. So he's using the Disney created character versus, because those descriptions, at least for Roger, don't match up between the book and the film.
The cover of the book, you can see the Roger, or at least the back of Roger, more described in the book.
He's a brown bunny.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's independently published now. I think it's self-published now, even though it originally had a publisher. So obviously this is like a newer edition, but yeah, they do have some of those some of that imagery on there. There is a major faux pas in this movie when it comes to the genie.
Okay.
Do you happen to know what it is?
Not off the top of my head.
Do you remember what the magic words were to get the genie to come out?
Oh, yeah. It's the lyrics to Disney's When You Wish Upon a Star.
Is it the lyrics to Disney's When You Wish Upon a Star?
It's like enough.
Well, that they claim it is. The magic words are, may your dreams come true. And so those are the words you need to say to get the genie to appear. So a key story point in the book is that Jessica Rabbit and Roger Rabbit, they were married. They have like their couple song, and it's When You Wish Upon a Star, the classic Disney song. And they claim that, he was singing that song was playing, and that's how the genie came out of the bottle at one point. But you don't say may your dreams come true in When You Wish Upon a Star. It's the last line is your dreams come true, not may your dreams come true. So like it doesn't make story sense.
I wonder though if that is something he had to do for copyright purposes, because that is a lyric that maybe changing that gets him around
I don't think
if
so.
he needed to.
I really think it's pretty free reign when it comes to books, as long as you're not like printing images. And even still, if you can even justify using images from things if you're describing it or breaking it down in a book and stuff. Like there's a lot more free reign in writing a book
It's
versus
one line versus like he's not publishing all of the lyrics or
Yeah.
selling the song or recording it in some way.
Yeah, so I think that's just an error. I mean, that's a pretty big mistake, but whatever, that happened. We just have to accept it and move on.
But you
I
also
think.
didn't like have to rub the lamp. There was
No.
I don't know, lots of different rules of genies in this one,
Yeah.
at least from what we traditionally know.
Another thing that does not happen in this book that is a big deal in the movie is we never actually enter Toontown.
No.
Toontown is mentioned a couple times, and the Toons are living in the real world. Like,
So did you get segregation
yes,
vibes?
literally. Okay,
cool.
so I have my next note is segregation, and I have some passages from the book I want to read because segregation is such a huge thing in this book.
It's a theme in this. And I think that's what matters. There's a difference here in time period by only a small bit of years. But from a history standpoint, that makes a big difference. So the movie is set in 1947. So we're post-World War II, like immediate post-World War II. And we're dealing more with the ideas of urbanization and suburbanization. In this book, it's more mid-1950s. And we're focusing not so much on urbanization, but you get this segregation feel because they talk about neighborhoods. Is it a Toon neighborhood or a mixed neighborhood? Toons have their own, they can't buy alcohol, which is why Toons make their own, and it's so strong and crazy. There's Toon sections for sitting in restaurants and not Toon sections. It's faux pas if a Toon and a human are together. The big one that first kind of turned me onto it was when the sergeants, when the police were working together, when they first find that Roger's dead, was it Cleaver, the Beaver?
Mm-hmm.
He's the police chief or sergeant for Toons. But when Hudson shows up, they're the same rank, but the human always outranks the Toon. And I was like, oh, this feels like segregation to me. And then more stuff throughout. I got segregation vibes.
Before we get to that segregation stuff, because like I said, I do want to read some passages. I do want to mention Jessica Rabbit is a porno comic in this book. So like obviously she's very sexy, but Disney didn't go as extreme as to make her like a porno star.
She leans into the I'm just drawn that way in the Disney version.
Yeah, whereas in this one, she actually, is quote unquote bad. No judgment on adult entertainers out there. Fully support them.
And she doesn't love Roger.
Oh, no.
That's a big thing. Their relationship is not what it is in the film.
I mean, Roger kind of feels like it is, but it's really not.
Right.
And it was all because of a spell. In any case, let's get to the segregation thing. I'm going to read a few different passages. This is on page 20. It says, I whizzed my reluctant companion past several human-only and several Toon-only bars before we came to a grubby hole-in-the-wall saloon, maybe 20 feet wide and 30 feet long, willing to serve both species. The bar, tended by a puffy-eared, flat-nosed human, ran the length of the right-hand wall. A bunch of derelict Toons held down one end, a bunch of derelict humans pegged down the other. The saloon's only interior decoration consisted of several framed newspapers welcoming Lindbergh back from Paris, a subtle play on the common belief that certain humans, Babe Ruth, Mae West, the Marx Brothers, and, of course, Lindbergh, were really humanoid Toons who had crossed the line. So this is something else that was mentioned, the crossing of the line where Toons, because humans are more well-respected, they try and cross the line through, I mean, some of them do it through genie magic and stuff like that, but there's this question of that, and the thing that's interesting about that is it ties into the film with Judge Doom. Because Judge Doom, we find out, is a Toon who has been pretending he was human. But I love this crossing the line concept of like these people we know in real life history may have been Toons.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And it's interesting too with thinking about, we said like this is published in the 80s, but we're reflecting a lot on the 50s. So we're about 30 years. Do we know how old the author was when he wrote this? Because sometimes like when you hit a certain point in your life, you reflect a lot. Like how now we're reflecting a lot on the 90s. Millennials we're 30 in our 30s, heading into our 40s, that we're now reflecting back on our childhood. So maybe this is for him that like 30-year gap. He can now really make sense of the world that he grew up in when he didn't realize it. So like if he was a child in the 50s, like my parents were children in the 50s and 60s. And they've talked about how they didn't really recognize segregation as a young kid because you're a kid, you're not really reading it until you get older and then you can start reading those spaces. So I wonder if that is what made this the topic.
This other passage a bit later on, chapter 19, it goes, I opened my closet door and flipped on the old black and white TV set I kept in there out of sight of clients. There was a football game on I wanted to watch, the Rams against the Bears, with the Rams trying something new, a toon gorilla as linebacker. Nothing particularly unusual about that. Last statistics I saw, nearly 75% of all pro players were toons. According to some people, it's ruined the game. Made it not so much football as barnyard brawling. Anyway, what makes this new Rams player different is that she's not only a toon, she's also a female. The first woman to break into the pros. A lot of sports writers dismiss it as nothing but a desperate gimmick on the part of a bottom division team, but I don't know. So not only like segregation, but also like, male-female equality kind of brought up in this book. Like just stuff you're not expecting from Who Censored Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, I do think that the book, more so than the film, plays on or makes you think about other social constructs that the film really doesn't, other than toons live in the human world. I think this one pushes that boundary a little bit further. But unfortunately, I think with the plot, we could have played with this a lot more, I think, in a meaningful way. That maybe this murder could have been about humans versus toons. I think we could have had more of that social construct come through and it would have been a stronger murder mystery maybe. But I did find that fascinating about this book, especially as a history teacher. I was like, oh my gosh, I see it.
And let me just read this final portion a bit later on where it says, I could never figure that, said Roger. I mean, why humans don't like toons. We're no different from humans, not really. We have different mannerisms and different physical makeups and a different way of talking, but we have the same emotions. We love and hate and laugh and cry exactly the same way humans do. Once again, like nail on the head. I don't know. I kind of loved that about this book, and it was just unexpected, so kind of cool.
It was. I do wish he leaned more into that because I think it could have made it a more meaningful story instead of we get a genie at the end who's killed Roger. But it was really interesting.
Yeah. So listen, those are the points I wanted to touch upon with the book versus the movie. Anything else that you specifically wanted to touch on about that, or shall we move on to some more Roger Rabbit-centric stuff?
Did you want to talk about Carol?
So Carol was an interesting character, yeah, because she was the photographer for Roger, and she got mixed up in the mess of the whole mystery. But what specifically did you want to say about Carol?
I was kind of hoping that she was going to be our character in the book, in the film, Eddie's girlfriend.
Oh, yeah.
She has a camera, and I was like, oh, is this going to be like
interesting,
a love interest, or maybe she's more reflective of that? I was a little disappointed that she didn't have more of a role. The stolen art thing was interesting, but again, like I said, to me it was like a red herring because it's not actually, there's stolen art, but it's not what prompted the murders.
The first 3/4 of the book is kind of a red herring. I mean, when you introduce the killer so late into the story, to me, it's a cop-out.
But I thought she was kind of a cool character because she has this in being the photographer with all of the different toons from across different studios that I thought she could have been she was set up to be a really cool character.
Yeah.
And I was kind of sad that she didn't get to be.
I don't disagree with you. So listen, the book came out in 1981. The film didn't come out until 1988, but the film was obviously a huge success, and it lived on in animated shorts. Now, of course, there's one I'm very familiar with. Can you guess which one I'm most familiar with?
I'm going to assume Roller Coaster Rabbit because it was shown before Dick Tracy.
But what was shown before Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
Oh, that's true. Tummy Trouble.
Tummy Trouble.
Two of your favorites got a Roger Rabbit connection.
Yeah, so listen, I'm a huge Honey, I Shrunk the Kids fan. So Tummy Trouble I know very, 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 very well. I actually didn't remember that there was a short before Dick Tracy, and to be honest, I can't remember whether or not I think I did see Dick Tracy in theaters, but I'm not certain 100. You know what I did? I don't remember the short. Roller Coaster Rabbit. These are all on YouTube. I'll include them in the show notes.
Roller Coaster Rabbit is also on the bonus features on Disney Plus. So in the extra section on Disney Plus, there is Roller Coaster Rabbit and a 37-minute it's called Behind the Ears special feature, where they explained a lot about how they made the film and why they picked certain actors, etc. But Roller Coaster Rabbit is part of that if you also want to check it out through Disney Plus.
Very cool. I wish they were all there because Tummy Trouble's great as well. And then there's Trail Mix Up, before a movie called A Far Off Place, which I had never heard of. It was Walt Disney Pictures and Amblin Entertainment, starred a young Reese Witherspoon and Ethan Embry. I had never heard of this movie, and I really didn't know about Trail Mix Up, but I did watch it. It's on YouTube, as I mentioned. And so these three shorts kind of, kept Roger Rabbit alive. There's been a lot of conversation about, why there hasn't been more Roger Rabbit. The theories are that, well, number one, well, I call BS now on this, but I'm sure you've heard the difficulty of getting all of these different studios to play nice and get their characters in one movie together again is a difficult task. I call BS because of the new Chippendale Rescue Rangers movie that came out on Disney Plus last year.
Yeah. Maybe at the time in the 80s, early 90s, more 90s, it was harder to do. I think that's what stopped, other than Cartoon Spin, that other Kevin Rafferty was trying to put together another Roger Rabbit ride, but how he had it designed, I think, incorporated a lot of other characters, and that was getting tough for them to incorporate. There's, merchandising. There were always just these little things. That's what I've heard as well, but especially now, and now that Disney's kind of bought up half of like, you probably wouldn't have a problem mixing in some new characters from different places.
The other thing you always hear is that like Disney and Spielberg kind of had a bit of a disagreement as far as like who really owned Roger Rabbit and stuff like that. So that became problematic. And let's face it, like, I'm sure a huge part of the reason why the first film worked in the first place was because Steven Spielberg has I've literally...
You can tell it's a Spielberg film.
I was just going to say, like, he gets along with everybody. I've known numerous people who like know him and have worked with him, and I've never heard anybody utter anything but the nicest things about Steven Spielberg. And therefore he has great relationships with like every studio. And so if he goes, hey, we want to use bugs for this Disney movie, do you mind? Like, you'll work something out. Without Spielberg attached, if there really was that disagreement, I just think it makes it really, really, really difficult. But somehow they made something work with Chippendale Rescue Rangers, because that thing is full of characters. I mean, E.T. can be seen in Chippendale Rescue Rangers. Like, it's crazy. But yeah, so it lived on in the shorts for a while.
I was surprised to find the shorts came after, because I thought this would have been great promotional. Because since Roger's a whole new character that Disney, because of this book, they got the rights to, as an audience, you don't know Jessica Rabbit, Roger Rabbit. So to me, I would have thought the shorts would have come before to kind of introduce people to these characters. And then you got to go into the world. They would have been, because the first two, Tummy Trouble and Roller Coaster Rabbit, they end like the film, how then we transition from the cartoon world to the movie set in the real world. And Baby Herman breaks into his like 37-year-old whining, whatever. It's, to me, I thought that would have like brought you into like, I want to see this new film. What are they doing with this? And you would have gotten to meet these characters before they were brand new to you.
I think it was more of like, hey, this movie made a ton of money. We cannot make our sequel right now because of legal issues and perhaps Spielberg issues. I don't know if that's like 100% certain. That's just what I've always
Relationship
heard.
issues in general.
Yeah. So like something was stopping them from making a sequel. So they're like, what can we do? We can do these shorts. And, there are people out there, I would like to fight them for saying this, but there are people out there that say a huge part of the success for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was because it had this Roger Rabbit short before it, because Roger Rabbit was just massive. It was literally the following year. It was, Who Framed Roger Rabbit was June of 88. And then the following summer was Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So like 1 year, if people were jonesing for more Who Framed Roger Rabbit, you went and you saw it. And also, let's just talk about at the time. I know it's fairly commonplace now with like Pixar and Walt Disney Animation to have a short before the feature. But like that was really uncommon in the 80s and 90s. Like,
yeah, that's reminiscent more of the 30s and 40s where you would go to a movie for a back-to-back, like how Mickey was introduced before a film. That's very much 20s to 40s era, goes out in like the 50s and 60s, 70s. But yeah, bringing that back in the late 80s, 90s.
Yeah, but even all of the movie posters. Like I have the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids movie poster hanging in my bedroom, and it has in the lower left corner, it mentions the Roger Rabbit short that is going to be part of it. So like it was used to market Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And like I said, some people will argue that that's really why Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was as big a hit as it was. But
although, would you say today that Roger Rabbit is as big now? Because like for a movie that was the second largest grossing film of the year, had these incredible characters, they made these 3 shorts. You said some are arguing. It won 3 it had 6 Oscar nominations and won 3. But it's not something that I didn't know Roger as a character until I finally watched this movie in middle school. Do you think the Disney Renaissance eclipsed Roger Rabbit and kind of like pushed him? Because a year later, we get Little Mermaid.
I do think, partially yes, but I also think, so Michael Eisner loved this character. If you look back to early days of Disney MGM Studios, he wanted Roger Rabbit to be the Mickey Mouse of Disney MGM Studios. Like
that makes
he
sense.
had that much faith in that character. And I just think that became messy, legally messy. And I think because of that, they kind of, he's never really gone away. We'll talk about his presence in the parks in a second, but I don't think that they ever developed him as much as they would have liked to. I do think he could have a huge comeback these days if they ever wanted to do something.
Nostalgia's really going right now.
Yeah. And so, and he's a great character, and the shorts are funny. It is very kind of off-brand for Disney. When you look at the humor, it's more Looney Tunes than it is Disney.
It's very Warner Brother.
So that's interesting. But, obviously we still have Mickey's Toontown at Disneyland, which, yes, it's called Mickey's Toontown, but I don't know about you, and I don't know whether or not this is factual, but I had never heard the term Toontown until Roger Rabbit. I don't think Toontown existed before Roger Rabbit existed. I could be wrong about that, but I think that Toontown is a creation of Gary Wolfe, the author of the book. As we mentioned, it's mentioned there, and then obviously the movie made it a known thing. But like, even in Mickey's Toontown at Disneyland, we still have Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin. How long it'll survive, we don't know, but it still exists.
So mad. I went to Disneyland for the first time last year in 2022 for my 30th birthday. That was like my big hurrah. I wanted to finally go. And Toontown was closed because they were building Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. So I have not seen Toontown in Disneyland, and I did not get to see Cartoon Spin.
I'm sorry to hear that, but hopefully it'll be there for a while. Hopefully you'll get back and get to experience it, because it is a one-of-a-kind attraction. It doesn't exist anywhere else.
And this just kind of hit me when we were talking about the first times we saw Roger Rabbit. So the first time I saw the film was middle school, but Roger Rabbit is in Disneyland Fun, the sing-along. So I knew Roger Rabbit. I didn't think I knew who he was, like his name is Roger Rabbit, but I knew him from that. So he also did run around Disneyland at some point. For Disneyland Fun, at least.
Yeah, he was, every once in a while you'll see him come out for stuff. I know back when we had the whole Big Thunder Ranch area and they did all of like the Disney bunnies would come out for Easter. Roger came out every year. So he shows up.
If I got to meet Roger Rabbit, I would probably cry.
Yeah, he's a fun character to see. And of course, he was everywhere at Disney MGM Studios. There were shows that starred him. They had the whole Looney Bin area, which was the backlot tour exit at Disney MGM Studios. It had like the dip machine there. And listen, there's still a little bit still there.
A little bit.
We get the Maroon Studios billboard at Disney's Hollywood Studios. We also have the Eddie Valiant Private Investigations window with the silhouette of Roger cut out of the shade. And I believe we can still find Roger's footprints in front of the Chinese theater.
Yes, he is in front of the theater. I love the blinds. That makes me so happy that they're there. And I talked about this with Courtney on our show on Book of the Mouse Club. I think at some point, it might have been with Kevin Rafferty's book of like, how would we want to see stuff? I really think if we're going in on creating these worlds and now Disney's Hollywood studio of like, you can enter Star Wars, you can enter Toy Story. I think this is where you rebuild Toontown, because now we have Runaway Railway. You can see Minnie and Mickey in the theater in the human world. Now go see them in Toontown. And I think you can bring Roger Rabbit back so easily to Disney's Hollywood Studios.
You want them to build a Toontown in Disney's Hollywood Studios?
I want a Toontown so bad. Or a I don't know, maybe what they were planning to do with Muppets, where you were going to have the Muppet version of movies, make it the Toon version of Hollywood. I don't know, but I think you can do it, or have another Toon section of something.
Interesting. I think it would be more interesting to have the real world with the Toons living in it, which I guess the Disney parks kind of always do anyway. Yeah, we got Mickey running around, but I don't know if there's a way of...
But I think you can bring Roger back. It's the right time period for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. If Maroon Studios exists because there's a billboard, I think you could play more into that around Sunset Boulevard, and
which was the whole concept, right? Like Kevin Rafferty talked about it on this podcast. I believe you talked about it on yours. It's in his book. There was a whole Roger Rabbit expansion that was going to happen that didn't happen.
That sadly didn't.
Yeah, but you know what? Roger did live on, even in more books. And of course, listen, the first book was 1981. It was probably, I don't know how successful the book was or was not, but it interested Disney enough to buy the rights immediately. The film's huge in 1988. So if you're the author of the book, what do you say to yourself? You're like, well, I got this huge hit on my hands. Gotta write a sequel. So in 1991, we get Who Plugged Roger Rabbit. And here's a little bit of a cop-out. Because everybody knew Roger Rabbit because of the movie, basically the author said, let's pretend my book was a dream. It was Jessica Rabbit's dream.
What?
We find out in Who Plugged Roger Rabbit. So basically, he's saying all of the rules, everything that happened in book number 1 doesn't really matter. We're playing with the rules of the movie in that second book, as well as in the third book, Who Whacked Roger Rabbit, that came out in 2014. So, I mean, honestly, really smart on his part. Major cop-out. But very smart. Because can you imagine trying to convince people of these new rules when, like, the rules of the movie are so, like, just, hey, we can kill Toons. Anybody who would read that in the second book would be like, no, you can't. Toons can't die unless they're dipped.
Yeah. So I'm glad you looked at that, because I was curious, knowing that there were other books out there. I didn't look at the years because I was curious. I was like, oh, if I read other books, like what stuff did maybe Disney pull? But it's the other way around.
It's the other way around.
From the Disney writers for his sequels. Yeah. And I know there's another Jessica book, I think, that just came out.
Yeah, so, I mean, I was surprised 24... I mean, listen, GaryWolf.com, I believe, is the website. I'll have it in the show notes. And he's leaning into the Roger Rabbit stuff as he should. It's his creation. I mean, it's pretty cool to say I invented Roger Rabbit. It might not be the Roger Rabbit that everybody knows and loves, but, like, without his Roger, there wouldn't be that Roger. So... it's pretty cool. And now 35 years later, here we are celebrating that film. And so if that's 35 years, that means the book 42 years old.
And we're still talking about Roger.
Still talking about Roger and wishing for him to be in the parks. So something was done right?
Awesome.
Well, hey, Emily, thank you so much for coming on and talking all about Roger Rabbit, from the book to the movie to the theme parks and everything in between. So appreciated. Before you go, why don't you let folks know where they can hear more from you?
Awesome. Yeah, so Book of the Mouse Club, wherever you're listening to Disney Coast to Coast, you'll be able to find our show. We're an unofficial Disney podcast dedicated to exploring books in the literary realm of Disney. Most of the time, we end up reading original source material and comparing it to the Disney adaptation. So I hope you'll join us. This summer, we're doing a British invasion. So we recently just talked about Peter Pan. We will also be talking about The Wind in the Willows this June, Alice in Wonderland in July, and Oliver Twist in August. So hopefully you'll join us over on the Book of the Mouse Club. And we're both loyal listeners of Disney Coast to Coast. So thanks again for having me. And you can keep with us online at Book of the Mouse on Instagram and Twitter.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emily. This was so much fun.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. Don't miss any future episodes by subscribing and following Dizney, with a Z, Coast to Coast on your favorite podcast app, where episodes are available 24/7. If you're a longtime listener of the show, thank you. And if you have the means, consider supporting the show over on Patreon. By joining Disney Coast to Coast's Patreon membership, you'll gain access to extra bonuses, including live stream Ask Me Anythings, unreleased episodes, and more bonus content. Take a look at all that's available by clicking the Patreon link in this episode's description. And don't forget that all new patrons joining at any level this month, June of 2023, will receive a genuine piece of Hocus Pocus film cell in celebration of the second sequel movie recently announced to be in development. You still have a bit more time to take advantage of that offer, so sign up today. Until next time, anything you need can be found in this episode's description. From additional information and links discussed in this episode found in the show notes, to the DCTC hotline where you can leave a voicemail and be heard on a future episode, contact info to reach me, access to the show's official website, some free gifts from me to you, and so much more. So be sure to check out this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!